Welcome back to CrimsonCast. It's been a while since we joined you folks on the live video portion of our programming, but we're happy to be back, and we thought it was a good time to do it. We're getting close to the midway point of February, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about with IU basketball at this point. I'm joined, as always, by my longtime co-host and partner in crime with this site and everything that we do with it, Scott Caulfield. Scott, how's it going this evening?
Partner in crime, PIC, man, doing well.
Yeah. Did you get your basketball goal installed?
Oh yeah, not yet. They're doing a full install for free sale next March or in March, so I'm waiting until then. But yeah, I got the 60-inch glass one picked out. Wow. With the Indiana wrap around it, so I'm excited. We have a as you've heard from the podcast, I have two sons, and my first son is extraordinarily tall. He's been 100th percentile his whole life. He's like 4 feet tall. He's 5.5. And so I'm hoping for an IU career. It's funny, just side note. I didn't realize I could sign up for basketball this early at like 5. And so I got the website for like Westfield basketball, and I was like 3 days late on sign up. So like I was like emailing the guy in charge of the program, like, can I please get my son in? I'm thinking like I wanted to be like a little bit of LeVar Ball. Like, I have a 4 foot tall 5-year-old. Like, if you don't let him in, I'm going to Yugoslavia. Like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm taking him.
I would pay to see you running a Lithuanian basketball team. It's really, I think, the ultimate culmination of CrimsonCast is you maybe in Moldova running your own basketball. Yeah, it's wow.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but anyway, no, we're getting a goal. I will shoot some pictures up, and maybe we can do a live podcast shooting hoops, and you can see how bad we really are in basketball.
Yeah, I really don't want that to happen. So let's try to avoid that. But anyway,
I'm excited. Breakaway rim gorilla. I'm excited.
The palpable excitement. It's
yes.
Here.
Yes.
If you want to chat with us, if you get on YouTube, we have a chat running. You can join the chat there, although a couple of people have said they've had some problems getting on the chat. But you should be able to just log in to your YouTube account and then comment as we go along. So hopefully you can work that out. But if you can't, you can always send us messages on Twitter, which is probably where most of you are seeing this taking place. You can either just add us on Twitter or whatever. We're happy to take any questions there. We've got a couple already from our friend Patrick from thehoosier.com, and we've got a couple other questions that have popped up as well. So Scott, let's just kind of start off first of all by talking a little bit of overview, because it has been a while since we posted a podcast, and a lot's happened with IU basketball since then, and I would say most of it's been good. You look at the record, and it certainly had dipped down quite a bit. They dropped to 12-12 after that loss to Michigan State, but 2 wins in a row over the course of the last week. And IU finds themselves not only on a winning streak, but in a rare rest period, which seemed like an unachievable thing. They got 4 whole days off before that Minnesota game. They're going to get 5 days off before they have to play on Valentine's night against Illinois. And then they're going to get a couple of nights off before they have to travel to Iowa. So really a chance for this IU team to rest. Let's just kind of talk about these last couple of games, though. What's been your overall impression of how IU has played in those wins over Rutgers and Minnesota?
I'll go back a second. I mean, I was at the Michigan game, Michigan State game. And, I was blown away at the game and then listening on the drive home. Like the rebounding stats against Michigan State were just insane. I mean, we should almost put up a banner for that. Like 58. It was like
Crean's gone. No, Crean's gone. We don't do that anymore.
Rebounding champ. Indiana's all-time rebounding Hoosier 100. It was like 58-32. It was insane. No, I mean, my overall thought of the last couple weeks are, it's crazy. I see this team still getting better. These are kind of scheduled wins and losses. Like, we're playing fairly well against the teams like Purdue, Michigan State. Ohio State was kind of an outlier. That was a really bad game on the road. But, Rutgers and Minnesota were teams that we should handle. The defense against Rutgers and Minnesota were insane. Rutgers was under the point per possession. I got to pull it up. I had it here a second ago. I was looking at it and now I can't even find it, but it was like, here we go. It was like, 0.6 of a point per possession, which is unreal. Same against Wisconsin. And those were both games where, they're at home, they played well, but it's like
Minnesota, not Wisconsin.
Sorry, Minnesota. But it does kind of show that I think this team was getting better. It's just we had a stretch there where we were playing some really good teams. I think we're seeing that this team is better than the worst teams. They're frankly right in that, 5, 6, 7 range, and they're taking care of business when they're supposed to.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I think you make a really important point about the scheduling. I mean, the fact that they kept it close against Purdue, they kept it close against Michigan State. I mean, that was important. I mean, certainly, Assembly Hall gives you quite an advantage when it comes to those sorts of games. And, I think an IU team that wasn't missing like 25% of their potential minutes because of injury, which is what this team is at right now, maybe pulls off one of those 2 games because they're able to hit some threes down the stretch or not turn the ball over or something like that. But those should have been indicators that, this is it's a middle of the pack Big Ten team, which sounds like a bad thing to say, but it's not really, because, that's significantly better than most of the Big Ten, which seems below average to a large degree. And it's almost, it's unfortunate. I was just talking with Jay Horry about this before we started the podcast on Facebook, but that Illinois game, I'm watching Penn State, beat Illinois right now on Big Ten Network. And, that one you're going to look back on and say, man, right now we could be 8-6. We could have a shot theoretically at like a 12-6 record in the Big Ten if, somehow they're able to hang on in that contest. But you can't cry too much over even that game, because, road games are they're tough for this team to play in. And, I was certainly worried, and we talked about it before that Rutgers game. I was worried about this team's ability to handle any sort of a road environment because of the lack of depth, and also just because of, what Archie Miller said earlier in the season, which is that it's been kind of a soft team from a mental and emotional perspective. And yet what you saw in that Rutgers game, and certainly what you saw in the Minnesota game, is a team that's suddenly starting to figure out that, hey, if we do X, Y, and Z really well on the defensive end, it's going to lead to offense. And as long as we limit turnovers and make decent passes, we're actually not bad, and to some degree might actually be good. And it's been fun over the last couple of games watching that switch get flipped. And it's tied into certain members of the team in particular.
Yeah, it was fun at that Michigan State game. I brought my a friend of mine, also a neighbor who went to Michigan State, and it is just fun seeing other fans, how they look at their team. And there was, I'll give IU credit. Like, Izzo played some unique lineups where he had a lot of guys on the bench, and IU took advantage of it, and that's where they pulled in. But there was moments he kept on yelling, like, Izzo, like, put in the NBA players. Like, okay, now can you get the guys who are going to be draft picks? Can you put them in? It was just funny seeing him get so worked up about it. But no, I agree. I mean, I think that this kind of feels like that point in the in Hoosiers where you start seeing, you get the music in the background, you start seeing scoreboards, Olynyk and the teams they're playing, and it starts to feel like this team is gelling a little bit. And again, I don't think we're going to rattle off a run to the Final Four, but it does. We'll talk about these next 4 games here in a bit. But, you start to feel like, all right, I could see us going 3-1, maybe 4-0 in these games, maybe doing a little bit of damage in New York. I mean, I wish that was played. This is like, God damn it. Like, I wish that was played in Indy this year, because I feel like that might give us a little more home court. This team does seem to play better as kind of young, middle of the pack teams do in front of their home crowd. But as you said, you're starting to see it kind of come together, and you're really seeing it come together in the defense. You look at the conference only defense numbers, and we're second in the conference on most, when you look all across those numbers, we're second in the conference. Our numbers are all really good, minus the 3-point effective shooting. That's the only thing that's bad. But, since the conference started, this has been one of the best defensive teams in the conference.
Yeah, no, it is. And overall, I think that I understand people's lack of patience at the beginning, and particularly in light of the losses to Indiana State and to Fort Wayne and the bad defensive performance against Howard. I mean, there was a lot to be displeased about, but it's really been fascinating to me watching Archie Miller work his magic with this team, because, he really set out and said, look, we're going to have to fix the defense first.
Yeah.
And if you look at the stats, I mean, gradually that's what they did. I mean, the Notre Dame game was kind of a weird anomaly on that path. But, you get past that Fort Wayne game, which was the game after, and all of a sudden they start regularly holding their opponents, to less than a point per possession. I mean, certainly Wisconsin was able to exceed that, and that was a disappointing game. And they've had a couple of games like that where they've struggled. But by and large, they've really started to throttle their opposition defensively. And certainly you've seen that the last couple of games. And look, I mean, I think that now that that's in place, it's starting to let the offense be a little more natural in the way that it flows. And, look, you're still going to have problems with this team offensively. I think, certainly there have been some personnel issues that we're starting to see maybe get fixed a little bit. But you brought up a point that was interesting in relation to all of that. The overall, the effective field goal percentage for this team is pretty good, largely because they're, when their offense is clicking, they're getting a lot of shots at the rim. They're getting a lot of dunks. They're getting a lot of layups. That's really what the offense is geared towards. They're still not getting much in terms of three-point shooting percentage. I mean, on the season right now, this team is still only shooting 31% from three. They're 328th in the country on that. And you look at the individual performers, and I mean, across the board, it's not good. I mean, people get excited when Juwan Morgan hits threes, and I understand why, but he's only shooting 29.5% on the year. Rob Johnson's only shooting 34%. Devontae Green has gotten better. Like his percentage has gone up considerably, and he's still only shooting 32%. So, it's been disappointing that
can I go off that for a second?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but it's exactly what I was thinking during the Minnesota game was Rob Johnson, who went 1 from 2 for 3, but his one, it's like it was just such a bad miss. I was thinking like maybe we should stop shooting threes, Robert Johnson. But I went and looked at the numbers, and he has some games where he's shooting all right, but this is the question I wanted to pose to you is exactly on this topic. When you look at Robert Johnson's three-point shooting for his career at IU, this is the worst year of his career. And he was, a 44% three-point shooter his sophomore year, 37% last year. He's down to 34% this year. Devontae Green, small sample size last year, but he's down, from 43% to 32%, which is a drop. And then Josh Newkirk is also dropped. I mean, he was 38% last year. He's 31% this year. I'm kind of curious, it's kind of crazy that your three main, outside primary shooters are all down this year. I'm curious if do you think it just more focused on defense? Is it just kind of an anomaly? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I mean, look, I think there's some system stuff in this, in as much as you can say a lot about Tom Crean, and I certainly have. We certainly have over the course of time. But at the end of the day, the guy did have a system on offense that allowed for his teams to be pretty good overall. Now, this team was always going to struggle offensively from three, I think, because while you're correct that this is the worst three-point shooting season of Rob Johnson's career, it's not that far off from the season he had last year. I mean, he shot 37% from three last year. He's only shooting 34% this year. His sophomore year, he shot almost 45% from three. So I question how much of that is system and how much of that is maybe a regression to the mean. And rather than Rob Johnson sophomore year, maybe he is actually, as a basketball player, about a 35% three-point shooter. And you consider that this year he doesn't have, Thomas Bryant pulling people into the post defensively quite as much. He doesn't have James Blackman Jr. pulling people to a different side of the perimeter. He's the guy. So I think that that's probably it for him. As far as the other players, I mean, I think some of them just aren't good shooters, but I just think that if you look at Archie Miller's offense and the way that he's tried to predicate the way that his teams score, he's centered it all around Juwan Morgan, and I think rightfully so, because Juwan Morgan is really good at scoring around the basket. And, that's
breaking news here first on CrimsonCast.
I mean, you come to us for these sorts of insights, folks. But I mean, if I'm Archie Miller and I'm looking and I'm saying to myself, all right, like, how do we score points if we're shooting as a team 31% from three, and that's, barely moved since early on in the season. You just can't go into any game relying on that as your primary offensive output. And so I think that what ends up happening then is you're not specifically running offense to try to get guys open on the perimeter. And when they do get open, it's situations where it's Colin Hartman, whose legs seem to have gone, or it's Devontae Green, who until recently was struggling. And so, look, I just think it's a systematic change combined with some bad luck and some just, some maybe just some guys who can't hit from there consistently being put in that position.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing, the positive spin that I'll put on it to kind of flip the question a little bit is, when you look at our offensive numbers, what I do like, this was an issue in the Crean years. While he did have a really good offensive set, there was always turnovers. I mean, turnovers were always an issue even when we were good the entire career. When you look at the Ken Palm numbers on our offense, not a lot of them are good. The one that is good is our turnover percentage, which, from a very kind of basic level tells me that, that's something, as long as we can keep that solid and keep a very low turnover percentage, all we got to do is plug in guys who are better shooters and just have a little better offensive skill, and we'll be good. Like, no knock to Freddie McSwain, because he killed it on the boards against Michigan State. But you take somebody with a little more offensive talent than Freddie McSwain, we might win that game, because he had unfortunately, a lot of his rebounds came from putbacks of shots that he missed. But that's where I feel positive about our offense. If you get a couple guys in there, who I think are coming in the next couple of recruiting classes, who can, get some of these open shots in and shoot, even just as opposed to 35% from three, closer to 40% from three, I think that changes, that probably puts 5 or 6 more wins in our category just this season alone.
Maybe not 5 or 6, but I think it's certainly, it makes a couple more games winnable, and that changes the narrative on the season, certainly. You're listening to CrimsonCast, or you're watching us. Hi, Galen Clavio here, along with Scott Caulfield. If you'd like to check in and ask us questions, hit us up on Twitter at CrimsonCast, or you can also go to the chat on the YouTube that you're watching, if you're watching us live, and ask questions there. And we had a couple of questions, which I want to go ahead and get to. And a similar set of questions, one from Jay Horry and the other one from Patrick on Twitter. Let me read Patrick's question. I'll just read both the questions because they basically cover the same ground. So Patrick asks, is the team better without Davis or just better as the year progressed? If so, what does that mean for next year? And then the question that Jay asked was, with De'Ron Davis, IU's adjusted defensive efficiency was 102, which would be 144th in the country. Without De'Ron, it's 88.6, which is 4th in the country. How much of that is on De'Ron, and how much of that is other guys finally getting it? So let me try to tackle both of those questions. I'll say this. I think the awakening that this team started to have regarding what they needed to do defensively happened almost simultaneously with De'Ron Davis being put out for the season with the injury. So I think it's hard to really ascertain how much of the defensive improvement has been as a result of De'Ron Davis not being in the lineup because he was bad on defense, and how much of it was a result of De'Ron Davis just happening to be injured at the point where the rest of the team got it. I think to some degree, it actually has more to do with there being no other option for the players on the floor other than to play like hard-ass defense because they have a very short bench and they have nobody in the post. And I mean, there's some precedent for this. I mean, go back 2 years. That the Big Ten championship team that IU had under Crean, that team didn't start playing well until James Blackman Jr. got injured. And whatever your thoughts were on, whether James Blackman Jr. was creating problems or not, at the end of the day, the implication from that injury above all else was that, hey, we have got to play a lot more together as a unit than we have through the first month and a half, 2 months of this season, because you no longer have James Blackman Jr.'s offense to rely on. And I think to some degree, that's a situation that you run into with De'Ron Davis getting injured, where, suddenly your post players are Juwan Morgan, Justin Smith, and Freddie McSwain, and that's basically it. And so I think that really does inspire guys to play a lot better defense, to pay a lot more attention, because they know if they don't, they're going to get exposed big time. I do think it's fair to say that De'Ron Davis was struggling significantly on both ends of the floor. I have a hard time believing that a 4-star guy with his amount of athletic ability and his ability to score in the post wouldn't have figured it out to some degree and been at least in some way, shape, or form helpful, particularly on the defensive end. I mean, you think about Michigan State and you think about Purdue, and it's hard to believe that De'Ron Davis wouldn't have had some sort of a positive effect defensively in either of those games.
Yeah, I mean, I would answer the question to say I think both answers are true. I mean, I think your point is valid, and I agree. I think this team started to figure out the defensive system that Archie's trying to run about the time Davis went out. But I think, as we also mentioned a couple of podcasts when Davis went out, is that he's a great player, but he is kind of he's one of the most he's the most traditional player we probably have on the team, where he plays kind of a very 1980s post style of basketball, and the team has to play differently when he's on the court. And it's not really a bad thing. It's just something different where Juwan Morgan is a little more fluid and the team is a little more fluid. When Davis is on there, it's a little more traditional, like we have a post guy. But to your point, defensively, I think he would have helped against Purdue. I think he would have helped against Michigan State. Like he is a useful player. So I don't think it's like we're just bringing him back and we're suddenly going to suck defensively. I mean, the thing is, here's the good thing for everybody who would worried about that is that you've seen this team start to grow in transition and understand the defense better. Davis is there to have that happen. Well, he's not doing it on the court, not practicing. My hope is that he's also understanding it and growing with the team that's there. But I think to answer the question, I think both are probably true.
Yeah. And look, I am very interested, and this kind of actually goes back to the question that Patrick asked, which I need to find again here. What does that mean for next year? Honestly, I'm really curious because I think, Davis has kind of been lost in the shuffle. Yeah. Certainly, I think there's a lot of excitement with Juwan Morgan's emergence and what that's going to mean as far as having an agile 6'7" guy in the post and how all that's going to play out. But, another offseason for De'Ron Davis where he is able to kind of really get his mind fully wrapped around what needs to be done. That's a really exciting prospect. And, for those people who would be tempted to write De'Ron Davis off because he had a series of bad games, be careful about that. Not just because he's shown flashes of promise. Certainly he showed a lot of promise in that Duke game, but we see players make leaps all the time, and this is not an untalented basketball player. You go back and if you want to use an old time example from IU history, you look at the performance of a guy like Daryl Thomas, who he was fine his freshman year. He struggled to get on the court a lot his sophomore year. His junior year, he was the starting center, but he was seen a lot of times as not having what it took to really be a consistent game in, game out performer. And by his senior year, he was, a large reason why we won the national championship. And so, you have to, if you look at the improvement of Freddie McSwain and you look at the improvement in Zach McRoberts just in the last 2 months, the reclamation project on Freddie McSwain that Archie Miller has been able to pull off should make anybody who's doubting the potential future value of De'Ron Davis look at this and say, no, wait a minute. If he can turn Freddie McSwain into a starter and a guy who is not only not afraid to put the ball up, but at times has been our best offensive asset on the floor over the last couple of games, what can he do with a guy who was as heralded as De'Ron Davis is and is certainly as talented and physically capable as De'Ron Davis is? So I'm really curious to see how that plays out moving forward.
Yeah.
So a couple other questions from Patrick that I'll go ahead and get to. So is this the Devontae we've always wanted, and is he finally here to stay? This is an interesting question, and certainly we had our criticisms of Devontae Green, mostly me, over the course of January, and then all of a sudden,
or is it the Devontae we deserve? Sorry.
Is it the Devontae right? Yeah, but all of a sudden, we went from the Devontae Green that frankly, seemed out of control all the time and was throwing bad passes and really struggled to kind of fit into the lineup to the point that you felt better with Josh Newkirk on the floor. Sometimes you felt better with Al Durham handling the ball, to where he is unquestionably the best point guard on the team. And the way he's playing now, really over the last, certainly over the last couple of games, it's just a night and day difference over what he, the way he played, even in the Purdue game, where he came in, took a bad shot, threw a bad pass, and then was on the bench for the rest of the game. And I don't know. Scott, I'm curious what your thoughts are here. I really have no clue if we have made the breakthrough with Devontae Green, where he's just going to be the guy from this point forward. If he is, I think that raises the ceiling on this IU season. But I really need to see him perform at a high level over more than 2 games, where those 2 games were against Rutgers and a Minnesota team that seems to be disintegrating as every day goes by.
Yeah, and then that's what I was thinking too. I mean, he did have 20 points against Ohio State in a game where everyone else seemed to be kind of zoned out. But that would be my concern too. And is this just a schedule system where he didn't play that great? I mean, that being said, he did have like 22 minutes against Tennessee Tech, only had 9 points, had a couple turnovers. So he had some games earlier in the year against subpar competition. Even subpar more than Rutgers and Minnesota, where he didn't look that good. It's interesting. We're in a unique spot in college basketball. We kind of forget, you and I grew up in the era where, freshman was just the guy who played a couple minutes a game. Sophomore is a guy figuring it out. Like, you wouldn't rely on anybody until they were a junior or a senior. I get the game has evolved, but I still feel like there are those guys that you see, like, that take time to evolve and take time to, they're a 4-year player. Look at Yogi Ferrell. I mean, his first year, he was a real detriment to that team that even went to, was number 1 in the country.
Not a detriment, but
well, no, but I mean, it took him a while to figure out how to be the player who could lead a team to a Big Ten title. Maybe not the best example. I'm trying to think of other 4-year players who really figured it out. Anyway, sorry.
Tom Coverdale's a good example, even though it took him like 3 years to figure it out. But yeah,
and part of that was just getting in shape. But all that said,
I look at it like this.
I need a bigger sample. To answer your question, I need a bigger sample size. Like, I hope we're getting there. I think it might be somebody. I think he just might be a guy who takes maybe 2.5 years to kind of become the player he is.
I mean, look, he certainly did play better against Ohio State and against Michigan State. And what the big telling statistic for me in terms of Devontae Green, because we were pretty closely monitoring his turnover rate, and you look at his turnover rate up until get to that Purdue game, and his turnover rate was still hovering around 28 to 30%, which is just ridiculous. That's way too high. His turnover rate now is 19.9%. So he's actually dipped it all the way under 20%. That is a huge positive sign. If you look at conference only play, his turnover rate is only 17.5%, and his assist rate is among the best in the conference. He is at almost a 25%, it's a 24% for assist rate, which is 14th best in the conference. His steal percentage is 2.6, which is 12th in the conference. His fouls created per 40 minutes is at 1.9, which is 9th in the conference. I mean, these are really, really good statistics. And so, I'm starting to buy it. And this actually, as it turned out, Jared from Assembly Call asked a similar question in chat almost simultaneously to when we started talking about this. So you do have to look at the evidence and say to yourself, all right, he's played 30 or 31 minutes in each of the last 4 games, and he's got 5 total turnovers in those 4 games. And he's got 19 assists during that same time period. He's also scored 27, 9, and 19 points. So he's making contributions. He's scored more than a point per possession in each of those games. At this point, if you take
the Michigan State game out of it, he shot, I'm doing the math, 9 for 14 from 3. I mean, he's almost 45% from 3, minusing that 1 0 for 4 game against Michigan State.
Yeah. So look, I'm liking what I'm seeing. I need to see it continue a little bit longer. And, certainly I think the big test is going to be the next road game, which is at Iowa, because that's a tough place to play. We've seen very good IU point guards struggle in that environment. It's not a great Iowa team by any means, but it's an Iowa team that can still spring a surprise here or there. So that's a game that, frankly, Indiana should win, given how well they're playing. Provided they're able to pick up that victory against Illinois next week. But that's the sort of game where if you've really arrived as a guy who's going to consistently play well throughout the course of the rest of the season, I expect the performance to not dip in that contest. So,
and he's a guy, if I was going to just place any bets on who has the leap over the offseason, he would kind of be I would have him as my front runner. I think if you look at it, there's a lot of guards coming in. If you're Devontae Green, it's like you can really put a stamp and be like, I'm going to be the guard to kind of lead this team next year, and he could do that with a major offseason.
Yeah, no, it creates a very positive problem for IU, which is,
Yeah.
everybody assumed, oh yeah, we're just going to toss the keys to Rob Finney as soon as as soon as March March 30th rolls around, and that'll be that. And now, I mean, as excited as I am about next year's roster, you don't want to have to start 3 or 4 freshmen. And
Right.
if you can let those guys come in and play 15 to 20 minutes to start with, and then if they prove themselves that they can play more, great. But if you think about the roster for next year, and your conceptualization was it was going to be, Juwan Morgan was going to be a starter, and I guess everything else was kind of up for grabs. If you can say, oh yeah, Devontae Green's our starting point guard going into next year, and Justin Smith is likely to start, and maybe Zach McRoberts is likely to start, suddenly that raises the bar considerably in terms of competition for spots, in terms of what you can do in practice. I mean, that is really, really a positive thing. Jared Morris brought up something else. Statistically, over the last 6 games, including the Purdue game, Devontae Green's stats are basically a quarter notch below what Michael Lewis put up as a senior. So there you go. And as he points out, the key is just doing that consistently. So
yeah, and Lewis is that's a good corollary. I mean, he's a guy who took 4 years to get to that point also.
Couple other questions here before we get back to some of our points. I'll go back to Twitter and take a couple questions from Patrick. And this actually ties in with something Jared just said. So all this works. What kind of, actually, I'll go a different question first. What kind of run in the postseason, assuming that IU goes to the NIT, would IU have to make for it to be seen as a great first season? You brought this up in our little PowerPoint here for, that we're talking, not PowerPoint, but our little Word document going in. First of all, I guess maybe we should start off, what are the postseason chances for this IU team? And
yeah. Well, I'll let you answer. You're better. You're the bracketologist of the group. So I'll kind of let you answer. Let me answer then kick it back to you. I think an NIT home game situation. If we can win out any home games, the NIT, I think those are wins. I mean, I think if we get to the NIT and we play a road game, I think everyone would view that as a good game no matter what happens. I think if we lose a home NIT game, I think that would leave kind of a sour taste to end the year. But I think, if we get in the NIT and we have some home games, I think winning those would be kind of the markers for success. That said, I want to get your thoughts on it, but that was one of the points I brought up is, my thought is if we can get to the NIT with a home, being a protected 1, 2, 3, 4 seed, we can get some home games. I think we're going to be a pretty nasty team in the NIT in a good way, because us at home, we're good. And we're going to be tough to beat. And so if we get to, the one or two line in the NIT, I think we're going to make it to New York, just because I don't think we're going to be able to lose at home. But I think if we lose a home game in the NIT, I think that would be a bit of a sour piece. But that's my question to you is, I was kind of looking at, if we get 3 wins the next 4, is that enough to get us in the top level of the NIT?
I think it'd be enough to get a 4 seed in the NIT. I think a 1 seed, that's supposed to go to the first 4 teams left out of the NCAA tournament. And that's right now, IU is neither in the first 4 out nor the next 4 out. They're significantly below that line. But, money talks, and, the NIT, let me put it like this. So IU's 14-12 right now. If they
do we need to kiss some NIT ass to let them know, we're not going to dump another home game? We promise we won't punt it this year.
Watch them be like, well, we'd love to give you guys a home game, but your head coach last year was too scared to allow that to happen. So no,
Georgia Tech
last year we were a 3 seed, and that actually gives me some positive feeling about this, because even though last year's team had a better resume because of the win versus Kansas at the beginning of the year, and certainly the win versus North Carolina helped as well. Last year's team went into the NIT with a record of 18-15, and this year's team has the potential of going in with a better record than that. I mean, right now at 14-12, if you beat Illinois and you beat Iowa, both games that frankly IU would have no excuse not to win, I think, at this point, given the way that those teams are playing. Now you're 16-12. You've guaranteed yourself at worst a 500 record in the conference. And then if you can beat Nebraska on the road, that's a pretty good win. Even if you just split the last two games, you're talking about a record of 17-13 going into the Big Ten tournament. You'd have a bye. You'd have a chance at playing a lower seeded team. You win another game, you're looking at a record of 18-14 if you lose that next round game. I think that probably gets you into the NIT as a 3 or a 4 seed. And I agree with you. I think that scenario is one that allows for kind of a redoubling of effort and a realization that, hey, we can really make something of the end of this season. As far as Patrick's question about how far would we need to go for it to be seen as a great first year, I mean, that's tough. I think for people, I think there's going to be certain people who will be like, well, we went to the NIT. There's no way you could ever classify it as a great first year. I think you could say that the improvement that the team showed based upon where they were on December 21st versus where they finished on March 21st, I think getting to the quarterfinals of the NIT or certainly if they got to New York City for the semifinals, that would be like, wow, that was a hell of a turnaround given everything that happened this year and given all the injuries. And I think that certainly for the sober and basketball respectful IU basketball fan, they'd have to look at that and say, yeah, that was a hell of an accomplishment. So that would be,
and we can thank the Big Ten for having us play the tournament there. So we're already we know Madison Square Garden, like that's we don't our home court now.
Don't even have to leave. We just we'll play our home games in the NIT at MSG. It'll be fine. So no, that's certainly something to think about. And ultimately, I would like to see this IU team in the NIT. I mean, I don't want to see them in the CBI. I think that would be a bad move. But I think that having
an NIT run would be really good for this team. I mean, I think it would be good for this team to get some games in that kind of arena.
And particularly this, because I feel like this team, I mean, who the hell knows? I'm completely spitballing here, but the way that they're playing and what you hear them say in their press conferences right now, I feel like this team feels like they could have been better than their record shows. Like, they feel like, man, if we had played better defense, maybe we or we have this sort of mentality now or then that we had now, we don't lose to Indiana State or we don't lose to Fort Wayne, or we manage to figure out a way to pull the Duke game out, or we figure out a way to pull out the end of the Louisville game, or we win a couple of these Big Ten games. So I feel like, unlike last year's IU team, which couldn't wait to get off the floor in Atlanta and finish the season, I feel like this year's team, if given the opportunity, would look at it as kind of a second lease on life and a chance to really make an impression, a long-term impression, and also leave a positive feeling in the air going into next year and say, you know what we showed at the end of the season was the team that we thought that we should have been all along. And that's the attitude we're going to be going into next season with. And I could absolutely see this particular group, seeing as how they're coalescing and the way that they're forming as a group. I could see them, feeling that way going into the postseason.
And that actually made me think of something. You look at the last, there's a 6-game stretch there from Michigan State to Michigan State. The at Michigan State throttling, they at home win to Maryland, but then you have this, unfortunate loss at Illinois, and then Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan State. And it's funny, we talk about this a lot in football about how the team hasn't given up, or the team seems to still have that positive attitude. They're still going in there trying. That 6-game stretch was tough. You get throttled on 2 road games. Michigan State, Ohio State, you just get beat down. You have 2 home games. One game Illinois at Illinois that you're probably not expecting, kind of a heartbreaking loss. And you have 2 games, Purdue and Michigan State at home. You play your heart out, you come up with losses. A lot of teams could have been broken by that 6-game stretch. And I guess just kind of hearing you talk about it, it is nice to see. It's like we went out into the wilderness, we came back, and our team came back, stronger. They played better against Rutgers, better against Minnesota. Like, I think that's a really positive thing looking at this season, that, I think a lot of other teams could have had that stretch, that 6-game stretch, and kind of come out and been a broken team, and we're not.
Yeah, well, and as Matt Uhl points out in the chat right now, sometimes you have to go through shitty experiences to learn how hard you actually have to play. And I think it's absolutely correct. And it's not just Indiana State and Fort Wayne, but it's also just, the Wisconsin game and losing because you can't close out the games at home versus Purdue and Michigan State. And I mean, Archie Miller mentioned it, the feeling of, wow, the crowd really got fired up for those games and you just couldn't get the job done. I do think that, as much as this team struggled with mentality early on, and as negative as people got about this team, Archie Miller did a really good job of keeping an even keel. And, outside of just matter-of-factly saying our team is soft, never really went after guys, never really, I mean, he's let play dictate, practice and effort dictate who plays. I mean, it's why Freddie McSwain is starting. It's why Devontae Green is starting. It's why Zach McRoberts has been starting. I mean, and that really does matter. And it's something that this program hasn't had for years. I mean, when you go back and look at the ills of the Crean era, one of the primary ills of the Crean era was that there seemed to be no ramifications for just playing like crap. I mean, and not just over the season, but like within games. And then this season, I'll go back to the Devontae Green example. That Purdue game, he comes in, plays bad for 3 minutes, and never sees the floor again. And that does have an impact. And I think that, when you talk about program building, that's what allows you to start competing consistently at a high level. And you combine that with good recruiting, and it really opens up the ceiling as far as what your team can do. And so that's really how I look at it. And, so I think we've probably talked enough about that. I just think it would be so good for this team to get a chance in the postseason. I don't know if they're going to get a chance in the postseason. I mean, I think they probably should get an NIT chance if they finish at least.
If we go 2-2,
at least 2 games above 500, I think they'll get a chance in the postseason. So we'll see.
If we go 2-2 in our last 4, does that get us an NIT berth, or do you think we have to win one more?
I think it depends then on what happens in the Big Ten tournament. I don't think it's a binary question. I certainly think we improve our chances.
That's what I meant. Like, if we go 2-2 in the last 4, do we still have to win in the Big Ten tournament to get in?
Yeah, I think so. I think you'd need to win at least one game in the Big Ten tournament. But I could be wrong. I mean, it might just be a situation where they're like, yeah, Indiana, NIT, yeah, please come on in. It might be a situation where Indiana's a lower seeded team and hosts. We've seen that happen in the NIT. They somehow find a way to make that happen a lot. So anyway, let's move on to a couple of other things. You mentioned this in our document. Is our record hurting Juwan Morgan's chances at an all Big Ten team? And as you point out, why don't you read off the stats?
Yeah, so Galen, I have a question for you.
Yes.
And we'll get back to you after this word from our sponsor.
Under Armour, right? Yeah. as Matt Zimmerman points out on Twitter. Yeah, I didn't even think about what I was wearing. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, we're an Under Armour. We're an Under Armour podcast now. So all people want to put in, you want to get a question answered, wear early Under Armour.
We're going to Vanderbilt. No, sorry, go ahead.
Maryland. So this kind of, you look at all like kind of some of the people looking at, all conference teams, and you don't see Juwan Morgan up there much. And I wonder, is our record hurting his ability or his chance of being on the all Big Ten team? You look at the numbers. He's 5th in the conference in scoring. He's 5th in rebounding, 7th in field goal percentage, 4th in offensive rebounding, 3rd in defensive rebounding. And, he is by far the MVP of our team. Everyone's keying on him. He's still doing this and he's doing it, he's having good games against good teams, yet you don't really hear anybody talking about him, as not even, player of the conference, but even on the all conference team. So I'm just curious, is it just because our record, and our record isn't even that bad. We're 6th in the Big Ten right now, or 5th. We're 7th, we're not even in the, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So I'm curious, why no love for Juwan?
I have no idea. I don't get it. And look, certainly there are very good players in the Big Ten, but if you think about what Juwan Morgan has done over the course of this season, and particularly given the fact that he is starting at center and he's not a center. He's 6'7". He's maybe 6'8". He's 6'7". And yet, he's been able to carry this team offensively, pretty much night in and night out. You look at his stat totals on the course of the year. He's got 2 games in the entirety of the Big Ten season where he didn't score in double figures. And IU won one of those. That game was the Northwestern game where he was down with foul trouble most of it. But, his field goal percentage has been outstanding. He is 73rd in the country in 2-point field goal percentage. He's 78th in the country in effective field goal percentage. He's top top 200 in offensive rebounding percentage. He's been Mr. Everything for this IU team. And, there are certainly very, very good players on Michigan State, on Purdue, on Ohio State. But I don't know if it's record or if it's just, if you take the broadcasters that IU gets on their games, at least the color commentators, and like the complete and utter lack of awareness of anything going on with IU's roster that we see among those folks, maybe that's an indicator of how little research the rest of the media outside of the IU media has done on the team. I mean,
this
was mentioned a lot in that Minnesota broadcast by Mr. Donnie Marshall, but Minnesota's really short-handed, and it's like Minnesota's lost, basically no more minutes for injury than Indiana has over the course of the season. And Minnesota didn't lose 3 guys that are, on NBA contracts, or D-League contracts. I mean, it's like this fantasy that other teams are affected by losses and, by personnel issues, and yet Indiana somehow isn't. I mean, if anything, that should be bolstering Juwan Morgan's case for an all Big Ten team, but it doesn't seem to be at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of baffling because you just look at these numbers and like it just seems like well, Purdue's a good team, so we got to put 2 players from there. It's like they're just taking who are the top 3 teams and getting 2 players from each one, and it's like this is the ultimate. Like, this is a really great play. I mean, this is one of the better seasons we've seen in a long time, not from IU, but it's in the Big Ten. I mean, he's doing everything, and his numbers are just insane. When you look at him, I mean, the conference-only rankings, he's in the top 5 or 10 in like a ton of effective field goal percentage and a ton of offensive ratings. And it's just, I don't know. He's doing it defensively. It's just, it annoys me because no question, this is an all Big Ten type season out of Juwan Moore.
He's 7th in the conference in fouls drawn per 40 minutes. He's 21st in the conference in 3-point shooting. I mean, that's the crazy thing. He's 11 for 29. He's 38% in conference play. That's good for 21st. In defensive rebounding percentage, he's 10th. Offensive rebounding percentage, he's 15th.
4th in field goal percentage. I mean, he's 6'7".
I think what's probably hurting him is that he doesn't fit a defined conceptualization of a position. Because, we're going to judge him as a center because that's basically what he's playing for IU. Well, Isaac Haas is having a better offensive season as a center, I guess, even though he can't play on the other end of the floor. Or you can go through and look at others. Okay, if you're going to look at him as a small forward, Bates Diop is better. Whatever the explanation happens to be, it's a shame that he doesn't seem to be getting more consideration for first team All Big Ten. So hopefully that changes. Hopefully that people start to open their eyes to Juwan Morgan here over the course of the last, month of the season, and some minds get changed.
Damn it, maybe we should get a vote. Like, we deserve a vote on all Big Ten.
Sure, yeah. Are we going to split that, or you want to just take the whole thing?
We'll talk about it. It'll be like a kid. We'll have custody. I get it one year, you get it the next. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, a couple other things real quick. Just something that we'll note, and I was going to bring this up on Twitter, but it's important for people to keep in mind that, and we already kind of alluded to this with the record, but IU is right now at a 500 record in conference. They're 7-7, and that equals the number of regular season Big Ten wins that IU had last year, with Thomas Bryant and James Blackman Jr. and OG Anunoby on the roster for large sections of it. Of course, Anunoby went out in January, but still, it really does illustrate the kind of turnaround that you've seen in the Big Ten season and the ability of Archie's team to kind of grind it out.
It's funny because I was thinking about that. You think of like everyone's all the talent we lost with Thomas Bryant and JB3, and of course OG was mostly not all in the Big Ten last year, but it is just interesting. It's like I went and found those numbers up. It's like how much they lost, and they still finished 10th in the Big Ten last year, and like we lost it, and we're actually going to finish probably with a higher record. And as you mentioned, we already have 7 wins. We're probably going to get 2 more at least. Yeah. I don't think we're going to finish on. If we finish on 7 this year, then we've had some problems.
Right. Some things to wrap up with here, because we wanted to wrap it up in about an hour, but we had a lot of questions regarding next year's roster. And, there's not a whole lot else to talk about this week. So we'll go ahead and dive into this. So Jared Morris asked, and actually this also was asked by Patrick on Twitter, what are your thoughts on Zach McRoberts' scholarship question? It seems clear to me he's earned one. Do you think it should happen Do you think it will happen? And Patrick asks a corollary question: do you pick up a grad transfer, or do you give it to McRoberts? Look, I think I want you to answer this question first, Scott. So why don't you go ahead?
Okay. You have 2 open spots next year. There is this kid, breaking news, kid named Romeo I've heard about, really off the radar, who may have a shot at getting one of those scholarships. And that leaves one more open. Here's the thing is, I mean, he's earned it. Like, there's no I think there's 2 different answers here. Like, McRoberts has earned the right to get a scholarship with this team. That being said, he's not a scholarship level player for a Big Ten championship quality team. I think that, what you have to do if you're Archie, it's a tough decision, but if you can get, some kind of grad transfer or a junior college transfer who's, a better quality player, I think you have to offer that to that player and, give McRoberts hey man, like you've done a lot for this program. You've done everything. And we thank you forever. And we'll continue to thank you by letting you play and also taking a check for, $28,000 a year. I think that's what you have to do. You unfortunately can't let emotion get too much into this. I'd say it's a business, but it's not, because they're student athletes.
That's right. Yeah, it's an amateur.
Yeah. But I think that's what you have to do. But that being said, if there's no really other great options, I think you leave that spot open for Romeo, and then you give it to Zach, and go that way. I mean, I think that the wrong answer is you give it to Zach and tell Romeo, hey man, sorry, go ahead and trim it down to Vanderbilt and Kansas. No more room for you, Chief.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's talking that way. Look, I think you put it maybe not the way people would like to hear it, but I think it's the accurate statement, which is that it is a business per se, and it's also a situation where, ultimately, McRoberts joined this basketball program without any guarantee of a scholarship coming about. He's certainly performed at a tremendous level and has been a key cog in making this team go. I mean, you got, media outlets making hustle reels of Zach McRoberts. I will shed no tears if we end up giving Zach McRoberts the other open scholarship.
I agree.
Certainly he's earned it with his play, because as you say, well, he's not a scholarship caliber player. I don't know. I mean, he's a guy who he's not scoring, but he's scoring more, and he's doing a lot of little things. So it won't break my heart if he ends up being a guy that gets a scholarship. I don't think that that'll happen, because I think he realizes the team will be better if they're able to bring in more depth and maybe even a starter level player who would want to transfer in. And at the end of the day, it's hard for me to believe that a guy who's a walk-on, who started the year without much chance of getting to the floor in the first place. I mean, you come in as a walk-on under a new coach who's looking to the future. That coach is probably not saying, I'm going to play the walk-on that was, played at Vanderbilt and was playing down at the Hyper the year before. I'm going to give that guy a lot of playing time. He's got to be looking at it and saying, my college career has exceeded my wildest expectations from when I started it as a scholarship player at Vermont. I have a hard time believing that there's going to be a tremendous amount of hurt feelings if Archie Miller goes to him and says, look, we really appreciate your contributions. We think you're a really important part of this team. But our planning and our attempt to move the program forward, we need to use all of our available resources, and that includes that extra scholarship spot. That might not be the sort of thing that people want to hear, but I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. And I think that likely Zach McRoberts is the sort of kid who would hear that and say, yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. So we'll see. I mean, again, like I said, I think that you have to separate being in the corner of the players and also realizing how basketball generally works, and understanding that you've got a lot of resources. You got a limited number of resources. You got a lot of ways to use that. If you end up not finding a good transfer, Zach McRoberts would be a great recipient of that scholarship. I just doubt it'll get to that point.
And I will say, I shouldn't say he's not worthy of a scholarship, but I do think from a team point of view, it makes this team even more interesting next year if you have an asset like McRoberts who can play at that high of a level, who comes in and gives you that 14th spot, where you don't have to give him a scholarship. It makes the team even more.
It really does. That's the thing. It's like if you don't give Zach McRoberts a scholarship and you bring in a guy who could compete for a starting position who is a grad transfer, and then you consider who you've got coming back, you consider the freshmen that you've got coming in. I mean, that's suddenly, I've talked with some people about, already, if you get Romeo Langford, you're talking about a situation where, frankly, you might be a strong contender for the Big Ten title just with that group. I mean, I think that only improves your chances if you're able to bring in a grad transfer on top of all of those guys.
Yeah, I wish I would have thought of it when we were talking about a minute ago. Looking toward the future, I'm curious to ask you a question. Any chance, we're kind of all pulling this around, Juwan Morgan being a senior, any chance you think that he might go pro? And I couch this as you've kind of changed my mind on this over time, when like we talked about it with Christian Watford after his junior year. And you said, should he, you and I had kind of had the discussion offline about should he go pro? And at the time I was like, well, he's not going to play in the NBA, but you changed my mind on this, that, guys can have, and you look at like Jeffrey Newton just, retired from Japan a couple of years ago. He's like a Japan Basketball Hall of Fame, and he earned a ton of money, had a great career. And, you can have a great career getting paid to play basketball just in other places outside the U.S. And there is, Juwan Morgan's only going to have so many years he can make money in it. And he's going to have a long career playing somewhere. And it may not be in the NBA, but, he could go and start doing that next year, getting paid. So I don't think it's crazy to think, well, he's not going to get drafted. Why would he go pro? You changed my mind on that. With that, I give you the question. Do you think Juwan Morgan could go pro, after the end of this year?
I think it's possible, but I would be surprised just because I think his 3-point shooting still needs to improve. It's been much better in conference play, unquestionably. But I think that I haven't seen him pop up on draft boards. Maybe I've missed him, but I don't see the buzz yet. I do think that another season, particularly another off season where, you look at tape and he's able to continue to improve his game. I think he's got a lot of things he can do to improve on his game. And I think the encouragement would probably be there for him to wait another year. The thing with Morgan that you always wonder is, if he doesn't suffer those injuries, where's his game at now compared to, where it is currently. I mean, last year he played in 32 games, but he struggled, certainly didn't play that many minutes. He only played about half of the available minutes. And then the year before that, he barely played at all. I would be really surprised at this point.
When he did play, he had his shoulder basically out of socket the entire time.
Right. So no, I would be surprised at this point if that were the case. And that's really all I have to say about that.
All right.
So, but the last
thank you, Senator. That very thoughtful. Thank you, Congressman.
The last question we'll field is, what's your game one starting lineup next year? And this is from Patrick. He says, assume no Romeo. I'm not going to assume no Romeo. Why don't we just go ahead and assume that Romeo will come? I think that's perfectly acceptable.
But you think that's, if you had to bet on Romeo, no Romeo, what would you bet on?
I would bet yes at this point. Because it doesn't look like the Kansas thing is going to happen for Romeo, or that Romeo is not going to happen for Kansas, is probably the better way of putting it, because they've recruited over that spot and the Kansas people don't seem that excited. And I just can't see him going to Vanderbilt. Maybe I'll be wrong about that. And if I'm wrong, then so be it. But I don't see the Vanderbilt thing happening for a whole number of reasons. So if you think like I do, I think Langford's coming to IU. So let me just give you the roster as it would sit. If we do the Jared Morris and we give the scholarship to Zach McRoberts, we won't assume a grad transfer. But here's your roster: Morgan, Davis, Green, McRoberts, Al Durham, Justin Smith, Clifton Moore, Hunter, Finney, Forrester, Race Thompson, Demezi Anderson, and Romeo Langford. So what's your starting five out of that roster on day one?
The four that I have are definitely Morgan, Davis, Romeo, Devon, and Green. it's that middle spot. I would probably say Justin Smith because he's playing. I just don't know enough about the other recruits we have coming in. I think there's something interesting about a guy, quietly you have Race Thompson, who has basically been playing on this team all year. And so I do wonder if maybe he's able to compete for a starting spot. I just don't know. I don't know enough about. I know Romeo is incredibly good. The other guys, I haven't watched enough film on, so I'm kind of doing blindly. But I would either say Race Thompson or Justin Smith just because they have a little more experience with the way they've been playing this team. But there's probably a guy out there who's better recruited. I'm looking like an idiot.
No, I mean, I think that Race Thompson has a real advantage when it comes to next year in that he will have practiced for an entire year. He will have been through the trials and tribulations that this team has gone through without, hitting the floor. So we had a couple of people venture some guesses in chat. Jay Horry with the guess of Green, Langford, Hunter, Morgan, and Justin Smith or Race Thompson. With the possibility of McRoberts over Hunter. So basically, Jay has a starting 7 instead of a starting 5. That doesn't count.
Start the game with a technical. Just we get a technical every game.
But we had Matt Uhl who guessed Green, Langford, McRoberts, Morgan, Davis. And then I'm going to say, you know what? I'll go this direction. I think it'll be Green, Langford, McRoberts, Smith, and Morgan to start. I think it's and I when I look at this and all the stuff we talked about Deron Davis and how if he can develop into more mobile, but yet retain all of the things that make him special offensively, I could really see a situation where he is in the starting lineup. A lot of it's going to depend on his effort level, but I really think if you look at the recruiting class that Archie Miller is bringing in, and what I think he wants to do long term, I think he's going to want guys that are interchangeable on the floor. And if you think about, Devontae Green being the point guard, that's kind of a separate issue. But get Langford, who's 6'5", you'd have Justin Smith, who's a very rangy 6'7". You'd have McRoberts, who can, he's got the height that he can at least go inside every once in a while. You got Juwan Morgan, who's 6'7", and that allows you a kind of flexibility where you can exchange guys defensively. You can do the sorts of things that you want to do. Jared Morris talking about maybe Hunter being a starter. I think that's definitely a possibility. I think you could. The nice thing about the lineup next year is depending on how the freshmen develop, you've got a lot of flexibility in terms of you want to go bigger. Ideally, you'll be able to have Forrester come in, and you'll also be able to have a guy like Clifton Moore, who's not going to play the 5, but can come in, and play kind of a stretch 4 sort of position. But I really do think that at least to start the year, and a lot of this depends on what happens with Deron Davis and how his development goes. Will Archie decide to go with a smaller, more nimble lineup that's got the ability to do a lot of different things on the floor, both offensively and defensively? I tend to think that that's the direction he's going to go, but we'll see. And I think the cool thing is you look at that roster next year and you're going to have a guy like Robert Finney who can learn, but can also come in and play relatively early. You're also going to have a guy in Al Durham who's probably going to be looking at this and saying, I really got to up my game because I could start losing minutes really quickly if I don't really start dedicating myself. Because Archie Miller, he doesn't really like to play a deep bench. And, we saw that with Dayton and, we kind of saw it by default here this year. But I think that the competition for those very top few spots is going to be intense. And that's what you want. You want talented players pushing each other day after day after day because minutes are not guaranteed. And I really like next year's roster because it allows Archie to go in a variety of different directions, depending on who's playing well and also depending on the situational lineups that they're going to face, on a night-to-night basis.
Yeah, I think it's funny going back to our conversation about Devontae Green. Had we had this question 3 to 4 weeks ago, like you mentioned, like everybody would have had Robert Finney in the starting lineup for next year. And
yeah, well,
it's
they would
funny,
have, they would have had Devontae Green transferring. Yeah.
right. But like now Devontae Green, but he's the only constant in almost everyone's pick is Devontae Green is starting next year. So I think that's Devontae, if you're listening, which probably not, keep it up, man. You got a starting spot next year, given all of us jack off pundits out here in podcast land.
Man. So look, I think the cool thing is there's a lot of neat potential with next year's roster, regardless, to some degree, regardless of what happens the rest of this year. I mean, certainly I want to see this team finish off the season well. I want to see them go to the NIT. I want to see them win a game or two there. I want to see them perform in the Big Ten tournament. I really think that there's a chance that this team makes some noise in the Big Ten tournament and is a team that you don't want to face. I mean, what hasn't been talked about has been how terrible the atmosphere is likely to be for most of the teams in Madison Square Garden, because I don't think
no one's going to have any. No one's going to have. It's going to be bad for everybody.
But you know who's going to likely have the best home court advantage in Madison Square Garden? IU, because of the number of alums that are in the New York area, and the fact that if IU enters and they're 10-8 in the conference and they're coming off a win against Ohio State at the end of the year, I think people will buy tickets for the games that IU's playing in. I mean, like, how often do people get a chance to go watch IU basketball in person in the New York City area? I mean, we went to where I went.
I was going to say, well, you and I went to the games. I mean, we were number one in the country. We went to the games in the Barclays, and we had more fans than, we kind of had almost as many fans as Georgetown. It's a hell of a lot. They're a lot closer. We had way more fans than UCLA, but I get that's farther away. I think the other team was Georgia. I think the other team in that
was.
And, so obviously they don't really not exactly the same, but I'm thinking of it like, if we play one of those top seeds, Ohio State travels relatively well, but I don't think they'll travel as good as us. Michigan State probably not, and then Purdue definitely not. So I mean, I think you're right. Of all the tougher teams we might play in Nebraska, no way. So I think you bring up a great point. I haven't thought about it, but I don't see any of the top teams having a better contingent than we will, because there's a lot of IU grads in the New York metro area.
We'll see. I mean, but anyway, point being, whatever happens with the rest of this season, and I think there's still a chance for some good things to happen. I really like the potential of next year, and you give Archie Miller another offseason with this group. You give him a bunch of talented freshmen who are going to be hungry, who are already looking at themselves as the ones that are going to elevate the program to the next level. There's a lot to be excited about as IU fans, and we're looking forward to talking about it. So that'll wrap it up for us. We really appreciate you guys dropping back in. Sorry it's taken us so long to get things put together here podcast wise.
Thanks everybody for the questions, man. Great questions coming in.
Questions have been great. Thanks to Patrick. Thanks to Jared and to Jay and to Wes Reynolds was in the chat. Matt Uhl. There was someone else. Theodore. Thanks to everybody for joining us there. Matt Zimmerman as well. We'll be back probably the beginning of next week. We might do another Sunday night podcast if you guys like this particular time. We'll try to come back and do it live. I feel like we got some more fun stuff to talk about now. So anyway, for Scott, I'm Galen. This has been CrimsonCast. We will catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.